Hey, Dave Melenda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you. I got a great one for you this week, and I got a question that I'm starting out with here again, and it like hit me really between the eyes. And so I'm hoping that it does. So strap yourself in, unless you're walking. But just basically, I got this question that's burning, and I got to get the answer. Okay. So the question is, can you identify with this? Okay, so we're going to ask you if you can identify with this. Is your life filled with problems to solve, decisions to make, and strategies to develop? Now, when I saw those three things, I'm like, yes, yes, and yes. And then I thought, well, that's a great question, but I really hope that there's more to it than that. And then the next line says, what if your solutions, decisions, or strategies were 10% better? And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I got to find out where that came from. So I am honored to be hanging out with Steve Fredlund. How are you today?
I'm good, Dave. Happy to be here.
Awesome. You are the founder of the Small Business. So tell us, what is the Small Business? What's going on over there?
Yeah, it's really intentional. People like, boy, it's a redundant name. The goal is we want to help the people that are in those small businesses because, small business can still be millions of dollars of revenue, many employees. And so our focus is really on how do we help the people that are in those solopreneur situations, mom and pop shops, small partnerships, just a few employees, because those are the folks that I think need the most help. And it's hard
Right.
for them to get help because most coaches, consultants are trying to get the Medtronics of the world. And the only other option they have are some of the state programs, which are, good-hearted people trying their best, but they don't really have the experience to give them help. So I feel like there's a niche there of people that aren't really getting the support that they need, but yet they are so critical. They're kind of like the lifeblood of their communities, right?
Sure.
They're the people that live there, work there, eat there, play there, volunteer there, raise their kids there. And I
Yeah.
think if we can help these small business owners become more successful, the communities thrive. And so small business is all about providing support to those folks.
And that's so cool because I know as a small business owner myself that I end up having to do a lot of the work myself. And so then I'm really good at what I do, but I'm not really good at accounting, or I'm not really good at this or that. And so some of us, put our heads down and just grind through it. I've at least learned to find people that are better at it than me, and have them come alongside me and help me. So specifically, then if somebody was on the call and they're like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I'm interested in. What does that look like? I mean, what types of services are you currently offering to somebody in a small business?
Yeah, and really we just start with, let's just have a free consultation. Let's just talk, figure out what's going on there, because I'm just not like a one size fits all sort of person. So all of us are unique in what we're trying to do and who we are. But specifically, we have a network of people that do things like coaching, consulting, training, meeting facilitation, masterminds. We have this big toolkit of things and a whole bunch of people around the world that are
Okay.
specialized in that thing. So if you're like,
Sure.
oh man, I need social media training, we have somebody to provide that. But we also have, access to a lot of people that do things like video editing, or some of these more tactical things that
Sure.
people are like, man, I'd love to have somebody do this, but I don't know somebody. We can help connect people with that.
Wow, that's great. Well, I mean, then you bring up that's a funny one that you bring up because as speakers, you and I live on video, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny because I think about how many people are like, I don't know how to do a video. So then rather than find somebody, they just don't do it.
Correct. No, that's exactly right. And I think that's what we run into that all the time. When I bring that up, people are like, oh man, that would be super sweet to have a video editor. And we have
Yep.
people that'll do it very cheap, that can do it really fast, really cheap. And so, we do a fair amount of that as well, because it just doesn't cost that much if you have the right skill set. But man, trying to do it yourself, sometimes it's kind of fun to learn a new task.
Right.
Sometimes exactly what you say is like, it
Yeah.
seems just overwhelming, so I don't do it. And then you miss out on a whole big piece of promotion that could be really helpful.
Absolutely. Or the opposite is true, Steve, where I'm such a I'm not, but if I was a perfectionist I can never launch anything because
Yeah.
it's never done. So, I see plenty of things on the shelf, so to speak, that are, 2 or 3 steps from completion for an entrepreneur, a new product launch, a new segment of customer, whatever it is. And it's just sitting there, never being launched. So I think that's one of the cool parts about being a coach is we get to help people, with that piece. So you're involved in the mentoring part as well, where you come alongside business owners and help them with that then, correct?
Yeah, and that's actually really my core heartbeat, my core passion. So we have small business. Like I said, we do coaching, training, consulting, all of those things. And I do some of that. I also, delegate a lot of that out to our network of people around the world that do those things. But what I found is like my real heart after I left the corporate world about 4 years ago, what I've loved doing the most is mentoring. And it's not, that's different. People are like, well, what's the difference between consulting and coaching and mentoring and all these things? They are different, but it's really mentoring, just kind of being that person that you're there for somebody whenever they need somebody. So, I mean, running a small business can be extremely lonely, can be extremely frustrating. There's some things you want to process, but it's hard to process that with, a spouse or a family member or a friend. And so the mentor is just sort of there to help you and kind of encourage you and say, man, I see this in you. Let's go. So there's elements of coaching, business coaching. There's elements of personal coaching. I know that's sort of the intersection that you're working in, because when you own a small business, it's all integrated, right? I mean, it's your identity, it's your personality, it's your own personal desires, it's your business desires. And so I love mentoring. That is really the heartbeat of what I love to do.
Well, that's awesome. And I want to circle back to what you said, because whenever I hear somebody left corporate America to jump into being an entrepreneur, an official entrepreneur, you probably had that entrepreneurial spirit for years and years. Excuse me. Sometimes people wake up one morning and say, you know what, this is ridiculous. I'm done working for the man. I quit. And then they start their own business. And then there's other people that are at the opposite extreme, that they've been planning this for years and years and years. And then there's obviously some in the middle. Where did you fall in that, Steve? Share your journey with the listeners, because there's a lot of people listening right now that really envy that piece, that want to jump, but they only will jump if there's a 6-figure paycheck guaranteed, health insurance. I only want to work 8 to 5. We put these stipulations on that, which again, more power to you if you can do that. But usually that jump doesn't include any of those first 3 things.
Yeah, usually all of those stipulations are what defines a job, right? And if those are the things that you need, there's nothing wrong with having a job. Maybe if you're frustrated in your job, find a job that's more aligned with who you are.
Right.
Because you kind of give up those guarantees of hours and money and all of those things usually when you become an entrepreneur. But I'm kind of between those two things that you pointed out. So I've been, like you said, I've always been entrepreneurial. I'm multi-passionate, and so I've tried to do as much of that as I could in the corporate world. Like I'd start new divisions or start new projects, and that was always sort of who I was. I started a nonprofit outside of work, and so I always had that starting catalyst sort of mentality. And so I'd always thought that starting a small business would make sense for me. Had some plans, but not really. And so I'm kind of in between there, where I thought about it. I'd done some things, but then there did become that day where I'm like, I've got to leave. But at that point, also, my kids had now graduated high school. So there were some other things in my life that sort of allowed that transition to happen. Sure. But in terms of the guarantees, I was between the two too. I couldn't just quit my job and say, well, let's just see what happens. And I also didn't need the full guarantee, because now my life situation had changed a little bit. But it was really, I did sit down with my wife, and we sat down and said, all right, what does this look like? If we do this, if I do this, when are we going to know if this is working or not working? What's the plan if after 6 months the income's not there? And so it really got crystallized on a general plan, some general metrics to know if this is going to work or not. And then from that point forward, it was every year I had one New Year's resolution, and that was to stay self-employed by the end of that year. And that's still, every year, that's my one resolution. Sure. I still want to be working for myself at the end of the year. And so kind of in between those two.
Wow. And that's so cool. So if you're listening, again, there is no right or wrong way to do this. Steve did it one way. I did it a different way. Everybody that's ever started a business has done it a way. And that, I think, is the cool part about it. there is no right or wrong way to do it. I will say though that if what doesn't work is quitting one day, starting the next, and thinking that as soon as I put my job change on LinkedIn and I do no marketing, no networking, nobody knows, the phone doesn't ring, Steve, unless you have some, magic bullet that I'm not aware of. It just doesn't ring. So don't get fooled on that one.
I'll jump in there, and that's true. Even though I'd kind of thought about it, I didn't like transition into it. I didn't start building a business because I wasn't expecting to leave the corporate world. There's a situation arose. I'm like, I just can't be here. So it was still sort of a shock. And yeah, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do analytical consulting because I'm an actuary by trade. People see I'm a free agent. They're going to be all over this thing. They're going to jump on me. I'm going to have as much business as I want because, I have really successful careers in actuary. Yeah. And then like nobody called or nobody would respond. And I'm like, what is happening here? Like, I thought this wouldn't be a problem. And so, yeah, I mean, I think even in my case where I thought I was pretty comfortable, like, okay, I'm going to get something. I got nothing, and I had to start asking those hard questions and start evaluating what do I want to do and who are my clients and all of those things.
Yeah. Well, those are all great questions. I look at it like you can dip your toe in the water, you can start going in a little bit, or you can dive right in. If you dive right in, just make sure that the water's deeper than 6 inches because you're going to be in a lot of trouble if it's not. And so I think that's great advice. Yeah. So I want to circle back to what you said, what we started with though, because I really want to unpack this with you, because I think about if your solutions, your decisions, and your strategies were 10% better, what would that look like? And I was really taken aback by 10% because I'm a big thinker, big picture thinker, not that it's right or wrong, good or bad. It's just, I'm thinking 10%, that's it. But then I started to kind of like, so where did that come from for you? And what does that look like for somebody listening today, Steve?
Yeah, well, I think, you think about the cumulative effect of every decision, every problem solution, every strategy being marginally better, what that would mean for your life and for your business. Sure. And 10% was, the research behind it says that, man, if you're intentional about things, you're going to improve your decisions 5 to 20%. What does that actually mean? Who knows? But if you think about, as a leader, and if you have people working for you, what would it be like? As the leader, often you're thinking through things a lot more than other people. So, making marginal incremental change might be harder, but what if your team? What if everybody on your team was making decisions that were a little bit better? What's the cumulative effect of that? And so this is all comes out of something I call the solving box, which is a framework that I have for how do we make better decisions, better solutions, better strategies. And that comes out of being challenged. People would say, so, throughout my life, I've always been a problem solver, innovator, that sort of thing. And people saying, well, how do you do it? How do you actually come up with optimal solutions? And so I was challenged to put that down on paper. What is my process? Because I never really thought about my process. That's just how I'm naturally bent, is that I'm always trying to optimize things. Okay. And so this following box kind of came out of that. Now I use that to help people, give them a framework so that they can make better decisions and come up with better solutions and come up with better strategies and then implement that into their organization, because really problem solving is a skill. It's a skill that has to be learned. Some of us are good at problem solving, but we still need tools to make us better. And so all of this is grounded in this idea of becoming intentional about making better decisions. I think so many of us in our life, in our business, we make casual decisions. We're not intentional about our decisions. We either make a decision because by default, right? That's what's always been done, or we make decisions because that's what we should do, right? Sure. Here's what everybody tells us we should do, or what other people expect of us. So all of this kind of comes together to say, all right, what if we were more intentional about every decision we make, every problem we solve, every strategy that we develop? And what if we had a tool to actually help us optimize those things a little bit more? Because a lot of times we are looking for a solution. We're not looking for the solution. Hey, what color should the carpet be? Oh, red is fine. Okay, good. Well, now let's start, sort of a weird example, but let's start what actually is, that's a solution, but what is the solution? What's the best solution for our company? Well, let's think about branding, our branding and what people experience and all of these different things that could come into what color a carpet is. And then you extrapolate that out and you start talking about now, what product should we offer? What should be our price? How should we promote ourselves? What about customer service? Should we hire? Should we, all of these bigger questions that a lot of times, because we have so many questions and so many things we have to think about as an entrepreneur, we sort of gloss over and just want to check off the box. Let's make a decision. But what if each of those decisions were marginally better?
So is my dartboard idea of should we do it yes or no, and then I throw a dartboard, or my magic 8-ball? That's the other one that I use. Is those are not good decision-making tools then, huh?
Well, if it doesn't matter, then they're fine. I mean, honestly, and it's funny. And sometimes the most complicated things, the decision doesn't matter because who knows? It's 50-50. Like sure. I'm a poker player and I work with, a podcast, and I talked to a great poker player one time, and he said, if the decision is really close, then it doesn't matter, which sort of blew my mind because these can be huge decisions that we're making about, do we call, do we fold? And then in business, do we expand or do we not? If it's super close, like if you've done all the research and it's like, man, it's super close. Some of us can say, man, that makes it really, really hard because how can I decide? It's so close. I can't decide.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if it's really, really close, then it doesn't matter what you choose.
Yeah. Either way.
So that's your dartboard and your crazy 8-ball might come into play there.
Yeah. Well, and I think about, you said something really important there that I don't want people to miss, is that problem solving is learned. Now I go back to my high school or grade school days and think about the way I solved problems was as I ran away from them. I mean, you're on your, I remember doing something I shouldn't be doing and the cops showed up, and what do? You run. There's a problem right here and we're going to solve it by running. And then the odd thing is that we tend to then grow up with that same scenario, whether it's divorce or whether it's, whatever it is in life, it's easier to run away. So are you involved with teaching people how to solve those problems?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the coaching and mentoring that I do, is because once people recognize they have a problem, like you said, they can, fight or flight type of thing. And running is one possible solution, but it's rarely the optimal solution.
Sure seems like the right one at the time, though.
Well, it does. And it's sort of the default, right? We talk about choosing things by default. Well, cops show up, you run, like that's what you do. And you don't have time to really rationally think, well, what are my options here? Do I take ownership of this? Do I blame somebody else? You're just in the moment and you're just going to run. But, a lot of the other decisions we have in our business and our life and our relationships, as you mentioned, we have a little bit more time to think that through and figure out what is the optimal solution. So that's what I really love doing, is when somebody says, I've got this problem. I can't figure it out. My revenue is stagnant, or, whatever the problem is, man, that the idea of digging into that is so gold. And the answer is really in the clarity. Albert Einstein once said, or was credited with saying, that if he had an hour to solve a problem, he would spend 55 minutes on the problem and 5 minutes on the solution. And I'm such a believer in that. When people have an issue, let's just get clarity, like to really, really understand what the problem is. Because a lot of times we take that in and we have a preconceived notion of what the problem is, when it really might be something else, whether that's our own happiness, whether it's our business growth, whether it's our relationships. Let's figure out what the problem really is authentically, transparently. And then a lot of times the solution just kind of comes out of that naturally once we've really identified that. But so I love problem solving, but for me, it's really around getting that clarity on what the problem really is.
Well, I tell you, is that your actuary brain then kicking in, I'm assuming, at that point, Steve?
I think it is. I think, I mean, as an actuary, I think one of those trainings is just what is really happening. Gotcha. I did capital markets hedging, where you just really had to understand what is really the risk involved here before we start figuring out what's the solution, what is really going on. So I think there's the actuary brain, I think, does two things. One is that clarity of truly understanding what the problem is. And the other one is this iterative problem solving approach where we're always trying to optimize, and it gets in the way, right? It can get in the way because it can actually slow us down. Like, okay, well, I got a solution, but what's the next iteration? What's the next, how do we optimize that thing? So it's, then you have to discern, well, which of those problems are worth trying to find an optimal solution, and which ones do you need to just make a decision and move on?
Well, and I got to believe that there's the analysis paralysis, right? Where you have
Yep.
so much information that you can't move forward. The opposite of that is, no decision is still a decision, right? I mean, kicking
Correct.
that decision down the road doesn't necessarily end positive either. So I just want to encourage people that are listening. I'm sure there's people right now that are facing these problems in front of them, these issues, concerns, whatever you call them, decisions. And you have to really kind of, make a decision, and not making that decision is a decision. But boy, I tell you what, it can be detrimental if it's not approached right. So
And I
I
love that. And making a decision is, not making a decision is a decision. That is one of the options. Is you can, one of the things that you can choose to do is just ignore it. Like
yep.
you can run, you can choose to ignore it. But that comes with ramifications.
Yeah. It's hard to stop, and make a decision. And
Yeah.
because there's so many things that, oh my gosh, what if the what ifs come up, the what are people going to think of me come up. I mean, all this stuff comes up when you have to make these decisions. And I think that's to your point, Steve, where you said that it's really lonely all of a sudden as an entrepreneur, because you look around and who's going to help you. And I think that's why that's why one of the reasons I love coaching so much is I love when people call and say, hey, I got this issue I need your help on. Mine tend to be more sales related, more customer related. They tend to be more team focused, maybe personal development related, so I don't have that actuary brain that you have. I'm, in one respect, I wish I did, but then I'm like, man, I'm glad I don't. So
No, we need people that don't think that way. We need people that have the sales orientation and that sort of thing too, that can get things done. And I think that's the thing that I think a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs, clients don't realize about coaches like you, is that you love to solve problems.
Yep.
Like somebody calling you with a problem is
Yep.
not something that you're going to be like, oh crap, they're calling me
Yep.
with the problem. You're going to be like, yeah, let's go.
Oh
Let's
my
figure
God.
this thing out. I don't think people understand that as
Yep.
coaches, we love solving problems. Like your
Absolutely.
call with the problem is an honor for us to try to figure out what
Right.
questions to ask you to help you break that code. Like
Yeah.
I think that's phenomenal. And so if you're thinking about using Dave as a coach, man, do it. Call him
Yeah.
with your problem.
Well, thank you for that. Those kind words. It's so ingrained in me that I don't even like, I shouldn't even say this on the air, but I'm not money motivated. So I get
Yep.
people calling me on a pretty consistent basis that have a problem. And I'm like, well, you know what? Let's see if we can solve this for free.
Yeah.
I just did a mediation case for somebody and didn't charge either the association that asked me. I didn't charge either side. And it was just, hey, I think I got a pretty simple solution, invested probably 4 or 5 hours in it. And we got this solution rammed up. But, that to me is way more enjoyable and fulfilling. And I like the word intentional. I think that that's such a great word. And that's why I wrote Growing on Purpose, was because there's a ton of people growing by mistake.
Yep.
And ask somebody, how did you grow your company to where it is today? And hard work's not the answer. I inherited it isn't the answer. I got lucky isn't the answer. I mean, if you're looking for a true path to what, I want to replicate your path, it's really hard for a lot of people to share that. So when you see intentionality, when you see that word, Steve, what is that? What comes into your mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's on purpose. It's exactly what you're talking about now. I think for me, it's there's clarity and there's intentionality. Like that is the formula. If I'm going to be an actuary, right? Clarity plus intentionality equals happiness. Clarity plus intentionality equals business growth, business success. I mean, for me, intentionality is great. You need to have it. It's one of the magic secret sauces. But if you don't have the clarity, then you're going to be just wasting time. There's a great quote. I forget. I'll butcher it, but if you have vision, but you don't have intentionality, you're just dreaming, right? So if you have a vision for what you're trying to do, but you're not doing anything about it, it's just a dream. If you have intentionality, but you don't have a vision, you're just passing time. Yep. It's the Alice in Wonderland thing. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So I think intentionality for me is so critical, but it has to be combined with clarity of vision. So what are you trying to do? Who are you? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? Who do you want to be there with? How do you want to get there? All those sort of clarity pieces. And then you intentionally do things that are lined up with that alignment. That's where you reach success. And so, success can come by different ways. I mean, I think there's two things in this world that really, impact us. One is there's variance, right? Just like in poker and anywhere else, there's variance of life, right? We were born in the United States versus being born in Rwanda. We inherited money from our folks who had money, or we didn't, education opportunities or not. Like, these are all like variants of life things. COVID, one country invades another country. There's all kinds of just these things that happen that are variants that we can't really control. It's the hand we're dealt. But then there's the pieces that we can control: our decisions, our intentionality, our clarity of vision. And I think that's where we can really make a difference in our business and our life. So if we're just relying and hoping for the positive variance, that might happen. I mean, it might. We might get lucky. We might win the sweepstakes, however, but if we're relying on that, that's all we have to go with. Versus if we are consistently making better decisions, if we know who we are, we understand our core identity, what we want to do in our business, and then we're intentional about those things, that's going to increase our chances of success far more than just waiting for variance. So a long answer to a short question, but intentionality to me is making decisions that are aligned with a clear understanding of who we are and what we want from our business. So in a business example, if we're just trying to grow a business, but we're not really thinking about who we are and what we want out of that business, we might wake up one day with a quote unquote successful business, but be completely miserable because it's not the business that we really want that's aligned with who we are.
Right. Well, and I wrote this down because that's a gem in that I'm going to learn more about is clarity plus intentionality equals growth.
Yeah.
So I talk all the time about goals, and I talk about, what does that look like? And I envision, because I'm a really visual person, I envision that, well, you live in Minnesota and I live in Wisconsin. So we share a border. So let's just say, for the sake of the conversation, we meet on the border and I say, hey, Steve, I got this brand new golf course. And it's just, oh man, it's just gorgeous. I mean, green as could be, it's just meticulously, laid out, and everything's perfect. And you and I walk up to the first tee box, and you're like, I say, you go ahead, you go first. And you look around and there's something missing. There's no green and there's no hole. Okay. And I was like, go ahead, Steve, tee off. And you're like, well, where am I going? I don't just, it just hit the ball. Right. Yeah. And that's how it is. If you don't have that clarity in your company, that's basically, you show up every day and you're just hitting, it's like at the driving range. What are you aiming for? You just want to hit it far. And I get that we want to hit it far, but we got to hit it where it needs to be. And that's the clarity piece. And then the intentionality follows along with it. And that's where growth ends up happening. So I think if you're listening, if you get nothing else out of today's podcast, make sure that you have clarity for yourself. Once you have that, then the intentionality, I'm assuming, I was going to ask this question, is that it's a lot easier, I'm assuming, to have intentionality once you have clarity, correct?
Absolutely. Kind of using your golf analogy there, right? Like, should I use I should be intentional about what club I'm going to choose, right? Should I use a driver, a 9-iron, or a putter?
Sure, go ahead.
I don't know where the hole is. I don't know where the hole is. Right?
Exactly.
How am I going to be intentional about this thing? I don't know if it's 85 feet or yards out there, if it's 500 yards, and I don't know what direction it is. And continuing that example, like, so if I just randomly hit it in one direction, the problem is you could end up, you're going to probably end up further away from the hole than when you started.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, once you have clarity, then you need then it's intentionality comes into play there. But that's why you have to have both. Like, you can be really intentional about choosing what club to pick, but to what end? What am I trying to do? I have no idea what I'm trying to do. Yep. So yeah, that has to come into play with both.
And I think a lot of people have a favorite club that they're like really good with. So then when they default and think of that in business, you have a favorite go-to, whatever tool, idea, whatever. And it might not work in all cases. Cause again, if you're, If you don't know where you're going, then just keep using your 8-iron or your good putter. If you're the best putter in the world, I guarantee you, you will not ever win a tournament if that's the only club that you use your whole day. So that's where I think these are so important. And you said something I want to understand, because I'm a Jeep owner. You said the right peeps in our Jeep. So I was trying to understand how that kind of ties into the small business, or where that actually, what does that look like?
Yeah. So the first TEDx talk I did I called it that: get the right peeps in your Jeep, the power of shared passion. And it comes out of a story from Africa. But end of the day, what it really means is that surrounding ourselves with the right people, having the right peeps in our Jeep, as we're driving through the area of the park that's our small business or a family or whatever it is, having the right people with you is so critical, not only to your happiness, but to your success.
Yeah.
And so it's just been a kind of a rallying cry to challenge people to say, who's in your Jeep right now? If you're a small business owner, aspiring business owner, or, in your personal life, nonprofit world, whatever, who's in your Jeep right now and who's sitting right next to you? And are they the right people? Are they the right people that should be having voice into where you're going? Or do you need to maybe move them out of the Jeep altogether, move them to the outside, maybe bring somebody in to sit closer to you? Because, sometimes we can't choose who's always in our Jeep, right? We're born into a certain family, but we can choose how close they're sitting to us and how much we're going to listen to them. And, maybe sometimes we need to bring somebody in because we're lacking something. And so it's this picture of saying, surround yourself with the right people and realize that this is intentionality, that this is your life. This is your Jeep. This is your safari. You have more choice. You don't have to just stick with the people that are there. Right. And it took me 40 some years to learn that. But since I have, I've been more intentional. I've actually kicked people out of my Jeep. You try to do it as well as you can. Sure. But I've also intentionally brought people in. Like the one example I'll use really quick is, I spent for a couple of years there, I didn't really laugh. I didn't realize it, but I'd never really been laughing. And I'm like, I love to laugh. I was always a practical joker. And I think I was just never really, I'd stopped surrounding myself with people who love to laugh. And so I was intentional about saying, I'm going to need to bring this couple people in that'll just make me laugh. And so, even small things like that, but in business, who are you surrounded with? And rather than just being apathetic and saying, well, it is what it is, that's a choice you can make.
Right.
You can say, you know what? No, I'm the average of the 5 people I hang out with the most, or whatever, however you want to think about that, and get the right people in your Jeep, not only for your success, but for your happiness, for what gives you life. Who are those people that sort of stir something in you where you're like, man, I love hanging out with that person. Figure out a way to hang out with them more and ask people in. And because a lot of people will say yes. I think we're afraid to ask people because we're like, well, they must be busy. They don't want to have they're not interested. But if you have a connection with somebody and you feel good about being around them, they probably feel really good about being around you. Sure. And they would love to have you give them a call, like your podcast listeners. I'll challenge them again. They might be listening to you all the time on your podcast going, man, it'd be fun to hang out with Dave. I love the way he thinks, but they're afraid because he's a podcaster. He must be super busy and not have time. My guess, and not to put words in your mouth, but you would love to hear from those folks.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right. I mean, that's just how it works.
People. Absolutely. I love it. I just actually ran into somebody yesterday at an event and they came up to me and I didn't recognize them. And they're like, you're this and that. And I'm just like, oh my, you wrote this book. And I'm just like, wow, thank you. I'm honored for that. I'm like, how can I help you? It's like, what do you need?
But they might be intimidated to reach out because you're an author and a podcaster and you're going, man, I'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. Well, and I think we do a ton of work with DISC, the personality profile system. And so when you were talking about, making sure the right people are in your Jeep, so to speak, I want to speak real quickly to the people that are listening that want to build a team in their office, in their company, wherever, virtual or whatever, that think that they should all be the same type of person. And that's where I think it's really interesting, because in my early career, that's what I thought is if I just had 10 more Daves, man, this place would rock, right? Well, the reality is like I said before, I'm a big picture thinker. So if I had 10 Daves on my team and that was all I had, man, we'd have thousands of ideas,
Right.
none of which would get implemented.
Man, we'd have really good
I don't
ideas.
like implementing. I just like thinking up these ideas, right? And so that's what I think is the power of making sure that on your team you have, the implementers, you have the strategizers, you have the people that are going to make connections. I mean, all these different people fit into that. So how do you utilize that differences for your concept of the right peeps in our Jeep?
Yeah, that's well said. Everything you said is perfect. I mean, and I think it's figuring out when you're looking to build a team, what do you actually need? Like what needs to get done? What are those bundles of tasks that need to be done? And then what kind of person would love doing those things? So before you just put out a job description, figure out like what kind of person and what else do they love to do? Figure that out and then find that person, a passion that aligns with your vision. But no, that's so critical. And so unfortunately, I kind of learned this over time later in my career. As an actuary, right? You want a whole bunch of actuaries around you. You want all of these people, and you don't really value the other folks, right? You don't value the HR people. You don't value the marketing people because whatever, they're all fluff. And you realize later that was a huge, huge mistake. And so, I
got to go back and apologize to all those people, Steve. So
I know I probably have, but because
on behalf of those people, just do your blanket apology right here. And then
okay. Well, I'm sorry, all you HR marketing people. So my first experience in HR. So I'm an analytic, but they asked me to start like this HR workforce analytics to bring data into decision making for people-based things. And like my first division meeting, there's like squeezy squish toys on the table, and they're like people coloring with crayons, and I'm like, what is happening?
Exactly.
It was really judgmental by me at first, but then I learned to understand that different people have different ways of learning and tactile learning, all this stuff. And I was like, what is happening? It was culture shock. But no, I think from like a personality perspective, or whether it's DISC or Enneagram or Strengths Finders or whatever your choice thing is, I think the whole goal right now that I work with teams on is understanding each other. Understanding how you're wired and how people process information and how you make decisions, and recognize that because they're different from you, it's not a character flaw.
Sure.
Because that's how I used to think, right? Like, oh, here's how I process information. I'm kind of a big, we actually did this with our friends. Like, I'm a big picture thinker. So I have this grand paradigm on how the world works, and every piece of information that comes in, I'm looking for what hook do I hang that on? Right. Where does that go right now? And my wife is like she thinks really quickly, and every piece of information that comes in, she is able to process it and say yes or no to immediately. So I'm taking in everything and I'm looking where to hang it. She's immediately like a thinking like yes or no, and she doesn't give it another thought. Whereas, another one of our friends is like, last in, first out. Whatever they bring it all in, and then they're trying to use it all right away. Even if they don't believe it, they're kind of bringing it all in. So, I mean, just understanding those sorts of things and personality and, introversion, extroversion, all these things is so important, because what it does, it helps us understand how do we leverage those people to utilize their gifts and make them come alive. But it also keeps us from being judgmental and having, we have more empathy toward people. And we realize just because they're different, it's not a character flaw. And so most of what I'm doing with that sort of thing is helping people understand just because they're different doesn't mean they're worse. It means they're different. Absolutely. What can you do to leverage that? And how can you release them to really engage with your organization?
That's fantastic. So I'm going to age myself here. Now, I know Joe Montana, the 49ers quarterback. I know he listens to the show every week. So good to see you again.
Hey, Joe.
He to me is the absolute best quarterback that ever lived. So that's just my personal preference. Now, the interesting thing is, like you said, everybody has their strength and their place on the team. If we had 11 people that were if there were 11 Joe Montanas on a team, they would never win a game. No. Even though in my mind he was the best quarterback, he couldn't, he couldn't block. He was a small quarterback. They never thought he'd be able to, throw the ball, and he couldn't do anything. He couldn't catch the ball. I'm sure he couldn't catch a ball. He was
probably couldn't run a 4.40.
Yeah, couldn't run. I mean, you'd have to have the size of the the Red Sea's parting in order for him to run through it. But that's what's so interesting is like early in my career, and like you said, same thing. You come into this meeting and you're like, oh man, there's an immediate judgment that doesn't even, you don't even, it wasn't even like you woke up going, man, who am I going to judge today? Right. It just happens. So again, if you're listening, I just want to encourage you to look around on your team and make sure that you're not creating a team that's all your like yes people or very timid, don't want to move forward unless you tell them to. I mean, that's, I think, so critical today because we have all these different strengths and personalities going on. So
I love that. And when my Jeep analogy, I didn't really explore it in the TED Talk, but like, we had somebody that was sort of like me, thinking strategically about who we were trying to see all big five in one trip, and we were trying to find the black rhino. And so I was the one that was kind of figuring out like the math, like, okay, if we go look for it here, could we get there? And then there's the other people that are like sort of in the awe and wonder. And then there's the person that understood the history of all of these things that could share that with us. And the other one that's like sort of immune to that, but they're looking at, hey, look at those elephants over there. And like, when you have all those people, man, it just worked so well because we all had the same overall vision where we just wanted to have a great time. And so I think that's the key. So have all these different people, but everybody does need to align with the overall vision. But that's a great analogy with Joe Montana.
Well, and I think that's like your thought process of in the Jeep. So you're sitting there and you're reading the map. Now, for me, I would not have any interest in looking at this map. I'm looking around going, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. Now, the really key here is that it would be really easy for Steve or it'd be really easy for Dave to criticize that other person. Steve could go, Dave, when are you going to help me? Why are you not looking at this map? Right. Correct. And I could be like, dude, you just got to enjoy where we are. Who cares if we're lost? Who cares? Who cares? Who cares? Right. And I think that's why we tend to want to build teams that are like us. And I want to encourage you to not do that because you need the guy or girl reading the map. You need the person looking out where we're going. I mean, again, if all 5 people in that Jeep were looking at 5 maps, we'd never get anywhere.
We'd miss everything.
You could have drove right past the black rhino and never even have noticed because we were too busy looking at the map.
Yep, and that's where team building is so huge. So you know each other beyond just what your capability is. But no, that's exactly right. So in that situation, like I'm on the map and I'm talking to the driver through the interpreter. What are our options? Where could they be? When does the park close? Figuring out all the logistical pieces. Yeah. And then I would just tell, if you were in the Jeep, Dave, I'd be like, Dave, let me know if you see anything really cool. Just let me know. Exactly. I'll figure this out. You guys don't need to worry about this. I'll optimize this problem. You tell me if there's something I'm missing because I don't want to miss out either. Yeah. In the meantime, I'll tell you kind of where we landed or if we have a decision we have to make.
I'd be nudging you constantly, Steve. Steve, look at that, a giraffe. Steve, oh my God. I'd be you would be. I'm like, oh my gosh, a quarter. Oh, there's a nickel. I mean, every shiny object.
Well, I've been to Rwanda 4 times. I've been on like 6 different safaris, and I tell you, that it's pretty hard to look down at any point in time.
Well, thanks for taking one for the team on behalf of all of us that look around. That's awesome.
You're welcome. Yep.
Cool. Well, hey, as we come in for a landing today, I want to ask you a couple questions. Number one, what would your tip of the week be? We might have maybe something we covered, maybe something that's just really on your heart right now, but just for the people listening, what would your tip of the week be for them?
Yeah, I would say the clarity piece. Know yourself. Okay. If you're an individual, if you're just, if you're not really interested in business ownership, you're not an aspiring entrepreneur, know yourself. If you are in business, if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, 2 things: know yourself and know what you really want out of your business. Not what the world tells you, not what you should want, not what people expect of you. What do you really want? And that would be my tip. Start there of really authentically knowing what it is that you want out of your life and your business.
That's awesome. And that's why I use the assessment so much, is because it's hard to know yourself just sitting there. If we did an exercise right now and we said, hey, okay, everybody on this call, on this podcast, just go ahead and take 30 minutes and just think about yourself, learn more about yourself. That's so hard. And so that's why assessments are out there, Strength Finders, DISC, whatever. You get to know more about yourself. So I love that that's where you start, because if you don't know yourself, it's really hard to maneuver with other people. If you don't know who's in your Jeep, starting with yourself, that's really hard. So that's really great stuff. So cool. Then the fun question, Steve, is what's one thing that you feel comfortable sharing with the audience that they probably don't know about you?
Yeah, there's a million things that people don't know about me. I would say last couple of years, I've rapidly gotten into disc golf.
Oh,
So you
okay.
mentioned the golf course. I'm like, oh, make it a disc golf analogy.
Oh, all right. We'll redo this. Should we start over and redo that?
Yeah, right. Let's redo the whole thing. But no, so I've been trying to be a little bit more active. I'm overweight, and I'm getting to that age where I need to take care of my body, but I hate just walking. It's just sort of annoying. So I go walks with my wife, and that's great. But just to go myself is annoying. And so my son brought up the idea of disc golf, and I've grabbed hold of it, and I just love doing it.
Awesome. So are you using putters and all the different weights and all the different discs?
It's funny, actually. So of course, because I'm a multi-passionate person, I started a podcast on it. And so when I was just using 2 discs.
A podcast just on disc golf?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
Yep. So part of it is because that's how I learn things. I did one for poker. Sure. I've done all these different things over the years. It helps me learn because I get to talk to all these great people and get like free training. So I always just use 2 discs. And then I did a series where I talked to a professional and just built my bag out there. Like what would be a good different discs to add for a recreational player. So now I've got a bag with a few discs in it. I still probably only use 3 or 4 in a round, but there's people that use like 30 or 40 different discs and stuff. So I
laugh when I see those guys. They got that bag behind them on wheels. There's like you don't even have enough strokes or throws in a day to use.
Yeah, I'm learning how they think about those things or whatever. But I'm still, because I used to just carry my 2 discs with. Now I've got like a small bag because I've got a few different ones, and you might lose them or whatever. But yeah, I'm still quite a ways away from the cart with 60 discs in it.
Wow. Well, congratulations. That's so cool. I'm glad that you're taking advantage of it. And now we're coming into summer, so that'll be even better. So cool. Yep. Well, thank you so much, Steve, for hanging out with us. And I want to again encourage the people listening, as I do pretty much every week. It's so easy to listen to a podcast like this and then just go on to your next task. And I totally get that. I struggle with that myself, but I just want to encourage you to kind of think of one thing that you could walk away with. Maybe it was the intentionality, maybe it was the clarity, maybe it was who's in your Jeep, maybe it was the solving box, whatever it is. But if you could walk away with one thing that you can implement in your life, that would make this past 45 minutes just so much better for us and for you. So if people are wanting to learn more about you, Steve, what's the best way for them to reach out and connect with you?
Yeah. And first of all, I love that advice to your audience. I think that's phenomenal. Pick one thing, because it's too much to try to process it all. Right. But I'd say, social media, I'm everywhere, but LinkedIn is where I'm the most active. So I do a weekday video every day. That's, Steve's Daily Stool, which is intentionally sort of funny with the language there, but it's just me sharing some thoughts from my stool. But LinkedIn, just Steve Fredlund, connect out there. And then I've got the 2 websites, smallbusiness.com, stevefredlund.com, if you're interested in finding out more.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So TEDx speaker, podcaster, business owner, mentor. I mean, there's a lot there. So again, if you're struggling and you're listening, that's why we're here. We're here to be able to come alongside you, whether it's Steve or myself, or it doesn't matter who it is, but find somebody. And if something that resonated with you today, just, pick up the phone, jump on an email, jump on a Zoom call, whatever it is with Steve, but connect with him, because we bring this to you each week so that you get one step closer to that true growth and what that looks like. And a lot of times your personal growth and your business growth, they overlap, they intersect, and that's what we've talked about today. So thank you so much, Steve, for hanging out with us. We'll have to check back and see how your Frisbee golf scores are going to do this year. I'm looking for some really good advice on, because I can't throw it nearly as far as all my kids can. And it's just
me neither.
it sucks when I'm like, it's two of my throws to one of theirs. So
it is what it is. That's where I'm at. I play old man disc golf. Let's just
I'm not into
keep
that.
in the middle
So
and yep.
I got to figure it out. So cool. Well, thank you again for hanging out and appreciate all your insight today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Dave. And thanks for the investment that you make all the time in your audience.
Absolutely.